$985.50 to Lakeside Country Club. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the blue font on my laptop screen until my eyes burned. I hit refresh. The page reloaded. The numbers stayed the same. My available balance read $14.50. My final year tuition for my physical therapy degree was due in exactly 48 hours. My father had just bought a country club wedding with my future. My parents drained the trust fund my grandfather left me to pay for my older brother Jason and his luxury wedding. They shrugged and told me, family means sacrifice. They meant my sacrifice. I smiled and signed one single piece of paper that night. The next morning, my mother screamed into the phone, begging to know what I did to them. Before I tell you how I dismantled their perfect life, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Luke Revenge Start, but only if this story hits a nerve for you. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I love knowing who is up late listening with me. I am Clara West. I am 21 years old, living in Delaware, and I used to believe my parents actually loved me. Let me take you back to the afternoon my world stopped making sense. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the bank contact number. My chest felt tight, like someone was standing on my ribs. I dialed the customer service line. A woman named Brenda answered, her tone bright and practiced. "There must be a mistake," I said, gripping the edge of the wood table so hard my knuckles turned white. "This is a UTMA account left by my grandfather. It should have $120,000 in it." Brenda clicked her keyboard. The sound echoed through the earpiece. The brightness left her voice, replaced by a careful, measured tone. "I am looking at the ledger, Ms. West. The custodian on the account, Richard West, authorized a wire transfer 3 weeks ago." My father. My grandfather handed me the original deposit slip when I was 10 years old. We were sitting on his porch, overlooking the Delaware River. He folded the paper into my small hand. "This is your shield, Clara," he told me, his voice rough from years of smoking. "When this family asks you to shrink so they can shine, use the shield." He knew. Even back then, he knew exactly who my parents were. I ended the call with Brenda. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford anymore. The laptop screen went dark, reflecting my pale face. Then, my phone vibrated against the table. A text message from my mother, Susan. "Come to the house right now. Important family meeting about Jason's wedding." She did not ask if I was busy working my shift at the clinic. She did not ask how my exams went. She issued a command. Jason is 28 years old. He has never held a job for more than 6 months. He is the golden child. I am the background noise, expected to applaud his existence. I grabbed my car keys. I knew I was not driving to a meeting. I was walking into an ambush. The drive across town felt like navigating underwater. The familiar brick colonial loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, its manicured lawn and pristine white trim looking like a spread from a lifestyle magazine. My father's polished sedan sat in the driveway next to Jason's spotless luxury SUV. I parked my 10-year-old compact car near the curb, the visual contrast with a neat summary of our family dynamic. Taking a slow breath, I pushed the front door open. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive Cabernet Sauvignon hit me instantly. Laughter echoed from the formal living room. I walked down the hardwood hallway, my cheap sneakers squeaking slightly against the floorboards. They were gathered around the marble coffee table. My father, Richard, leaned back in his leather armchair, swirling a glass of dark red wine. My mother, Susan, perched on the edge of the sofa, beaming at my brother. Beside Jason sat his fiancée, Brittany, holding her left hand up to catch the overhead light on her diamond ring. Jason scrolled through his phone, ignoring the conversation until it suited him. He is 28. He failed out of 2 business programs and currently works a mid-level marketing job secured entirely by our father's golf course connections. I spent the last 3 years waitressing on weekends and shelving books at the campus library to afford rent so I could protect my grandfather's trust for my clinical rotations. That money was my finish line. I stood in the archway, my pulse hammering against my ribs, waiting for someone to notice me. Susan spotted me first. Her smile tightened, just a fraction, before returning to its practiced wattage. "Have a seat, Clara," she said, gesturing to a stiff wooden chair apart from the main seating area. I remained standing. The air in the room felt thick. Why am I here? Susan set her wine glass down. She folded her hands in her lap, adopting the tone of a preschool teacher delivering a mild scolding. "Well, you know how stressful wedding planning can be. Jason and Brittany decided on Lakeside Country Club, and the budget ballooned. Flowers alone cost more than a reliable car these days." She chuckled. Nobody else laughed. "Where is my money?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow, cold. Richard set his glass on a coaster. He steepled his fingers, staring at me with the detached evaluation he usually reserved for unruly employees. "We borrowed the funds from your account, Clara. It was sitting right there, and your brother needed it to secure the venue and the caterer. We are acting as a family unit." Borrowed. The word hung in the air, a neat little package wrapping up theft. "You took $120,000, I said, keeping my volume steady. "My tuition is due on Friday. I will be dropped from my physical therapy program." Richard sighed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Stop being dramatic. Family means sacrifice, Clara. You can easily take out student loans to finish your little program. Jason only gets married once. This event sets the stage for his future network. It is an investment." An investment. My grandfather built that money over 40 years, working at a paper mill, saving every spare dollar so I would never have to beg this man for anything. And Richard handed it to a country club to buy shrimp appetizers and an open bar. "How do you expect me to pay it back?" I asked, testing the waters, looking for any sign of remorse. Richard patted the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket, right where his leather wallet rested. He smirked. "You will figure it out. You are smart. But remember this lesson, Clara. Credit is king. In the adult world, your name and your credit limit are all that matter." My signature opened doors today that yours never could. A pristine financial standing makes the rules. Susan stood up and closed the distance between us. She reached out, her manicured fingers plucking a stray piece of lint off the shoulder of my faded cardigan. The gesture was designed to make me feel small, to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. "Do not ruin this night with your selfishness," she murmured, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Your brother deserves a beautiful day. Why can you never just be happy for him?" I glanced at Jason. He did not even look up from his screen. He swiped his thumb across the glass, sighed, and muttered, "Can we wrap this up? Brittany wants to go look at floral centerpieces online." Brittany took a sip of her wine, looking at me over the rim of her crystal glass with mild annoyance, as if my stolen future was causing a delay in her evening schedule. I looked at the four of them, the tailored clothes, the diamond ring, the half-empty bottle of imported wine. They expected a performance. They wanted me to yell, to cry, to stomp my feet. If I screamed, they could dismiss me as the hysterical, jealous sister. They could tell the rest of the extended relatives that I threw a tantrum over a misunderstanding. Susan was already bracing her face into a mask of victimhood, ready to weaponize my anger to make herself the martyr. A strange, numbing calm washed over me. The panic that had choked me in my kitchen dissolved into a clinical clarity. My grandfather did not raise a victim. He raised a strategist. I realized that arguing with them was useless. They did not speak the language of fairness or morality. They only spoke the language of leverage. "I will leave you to your planning," I said softly. Susan blinked, confused by the lack of fireworks. See, I told you she would understand, Richard said, picking up his wine glass again, already dismissing my presence. Just get some loan applications started. We can review them over the weekend if you need help with the paperwork. I turned around and walked down the hallway. I did not slam the front door. I closed it with a soft, definitive click, sealing them inside their delusion. The autumn Delaware air hit my face, sharp and biting. I walked down the gravel driveway, climbed into my compact car, and locked the doors. The engine remained off. Streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard. My hands no longer shook. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the banking application. I bypassed the checking portal and dug into the account settings, navigating to the legal documents section of the trust. I needed to see the exact classification of the deposit. The glowing screen illuminated the tight interior of the car. My eyes scanned the dense legal text detailing the structure of my grandfather's gift. Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. I scrolled past the initial terms, hunting for the clauses governing the custodian rules. The text detailed the exact age of maturity for my specific state. A single line of banking law stared back at me, a silent, lethal weapon waiting to be picked up. My father thought his signature made the rules. He thought his name was untouchable. He overlooked one critical detail. The screen read, "Account terminates and transfers solely to the beneficiary upon reaching 21 years of age." I turned 21 last month. I leaned my head back against the driver's seat and stared at the roof of my car. Richard was not the legal custodian anymore. The money did not belong to the family unit. The bank allowed a man with no legal authority to wire 6 figures out of an adult woman's private account. The pieces of my grandfather's shield clicked together in the dark. I started the engine and drove out of the cul-de-sac, heading straight for the university legal clinic. The next 72 hours stretched into a grueling test of endurance. I existed on black coffee and adrenaline, mechanically attending my physical therapy lectures while my mind plotted a path through the wreckage of my finances. The deadline for my tuition loomed over me, a digital clock ticking down to my academic execution. Every time I looked at my phone, there was a new photo from Susan, showcasing a flower arrangement or a silk napkin ring for Jason's reception. They were celebrating my ruination in real time. I skipped my afternoon anatomy lab and drove across campus to the Student Union building. The basement housed the University Legal Aid Clinic, a cramped space smelling of old paper and stale toner. The waiting room consisted of 3 plastic chairs and a humming vending machine. I sat holding a manila folder containing every printout from my banking portal, my birth certificate, and the original trust documents my grandfather gave me a decade ago. A door opened and a woman stepped into the waiting area. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun. She introduced herself as Diane, the lead paralegal overseeing the student advocates. I followed her into a small office dominated by a battered metal desk overflowing with case files. Diane did not waste time with small talk. She took my manila folder, slipped on a pair of reading glasses, and began to review the paperwork. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rustle of turning pages and the rhythmic tapping of her pen against the desk. I watched her eyes track the numbers, the dates, the signatures. Her pen stopped tapping. She looked up, removing her glasses, her expression shifting from professional detachment to intense predatory focus. "Your father authorized a wire transfer of $119,985 on Tuesday," she stated, confirming the data. "Yes." "And you turned 21 35 days ago." "Yes." Diane leaned back in her chair. The metal springs groaned under the sudden shift in weight. She placed her hands flat on the desk, framing the documents. "Clara," she began, her tone carrying the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict, "what we are looking at here is not a family dispute. We are looking at a catastrophic institutional failure and a federal crime." The air in the cramped office grew heavy. I swallowed hard. waiting for her to explain the mechanics of my revenge. Under Delaware law, Diane continued, pointing to a highlighted section of the state code on her monitor, Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, accounts automatically terminate when the beneficiary reaches the age of 21. The funds instantly become your sole property. Richard West lost all custodial rights, all fiduciary privileges, and all legal access to that money the moment the clock struck midnight on your 21st birthday. I stared at the paperwork. I knew the rule, but hearing a legal professional confirm it made the reality sharp and undeniable. "So my father stole it," I said. Diane shook her head slightly. "Oh, your father committed theft, absolutely. But the real target here is not your father. It is the bank." She leaned forward, tapping the wire transfer receipt with her pen. The financial institution allowed an unauthorized third party to wire 6 figures out of a matured private account without securing the signature of the legal account holder. That is a flagrant violation of federal banking regulations. It exposes them to millions of dollars in civil liability, regulatory fines, and potential federal audits. The bank broke the law to facilitate your father's theft. The scope of the situation widened, revealing a battlefield I had not anticipated. I was not just fighting Richard and Susan anymore. I was dragging a corporate financial institution into the crossfire. "Can I get the money back?" I asked, the only question that truly mattered. "Yes," Diane said without hesitation. "We file a formal fraud claim with the bank's regional security director, copying the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We cite their breach of fiduciary duty regarding a matured UTMA account. When their legal department realizes the magnitude of their exposure, their insurance will restore your funds in full to avoid a lawsuit they cannot possibly win." A wave of relief threatened to break my composure, but Diane held up a hand, stopping the emotion before it surfaced. "Before you celebrate, you need to understand the chain reaction," she warned, her eyes locking onto mine. "The bank will restore your money, but they will not absorb a 6-figure loss. They will immediately initiate recovery protocols. That means they will flag the transaction as fraudulent wire activity. They will freeze every asset tied to Richard West's Social Security number to secure collateral. And then they will hand the file over to federal investigators to prosecute him for wire fraud." The room went silent. The humming of the vending machine outside suddenly sounded deafening. "If we send this report," Diane said softly, leaning closer, "the bank will legally obliterate your parents. Their accounts, their credit, their home, everything will be locked down pending a federal probe. Your father will face felony charges. This is the nuclear option, Clara. Once I hit send, you cannot undo the damage to your family." I looked away from her intense gaze, my eyes drifting to the heavy canvas backpack resting by my feet. Inside were 3 thick textbooks detailing kinesiology, biomechanics, and neurological rehabilitation. I had spent countless nights falling asleep over those pages, sacrificing parties, vacations, and sleep to maintain my grade point average. I worked doubles at a diner, smiling through exhaustion, putting every tip into a jar to pay for gas and groceries so the trust fund would remain untouched. My parents never attended a single academic award ceremony. They never asked about my clinical rotations. They spent their energy curating Jason's life, funding his failures, and masking his incompetence with their checkbook. And when the bill came due for his latest vanity project, they decided my future was the acceptable currency. Richard told me to figure it out. He told me to take out loans. He told me that my sacrifice was mandatory for Jason's success. I thought about my grandfather. I remembered the rough texture of his calloused hands and the smell of pipe tobacco that always clung to his jacket. He knew what Richard was capable of doing. He set up the UTMA account specifically to bypass my father's control. He handed me a shield. For 21 years, it sat dormant. The time had come to raise it. I looked back at Diane. Her expression remained neutral, waiting for my command. She was offering me the detonator. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel hesitation. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a boundary being drawn in concrete. "Draft the report," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Include the OCC notification." Diane nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. She pulled a fresh legal pad from her drawer and uncapped her pen. "We need to move fast. The bank will need 48 hours to process the claim and trigger the internal security protocols. Do you have any evidence proving exactly where the money went?" "I do not have the receipts," I admitted, thinking about the paper trail. My father handled the venue contracts. "We need written proof that the funds were misdirected for a non-beneficiary purpose," Diane instructed, her pen flying across the legal pad. "A confession, an email, a text message confirming the money funded the wedding. Without that, your father could try to claim he moved the money into another account for your benefit, and the bank error was administrative. We need to nail down the destination of the wire." I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen displayed a notification. A new text message from Brittany, my future sister-in-law. "We need the smoking gun," Diane said, looking up from her notes. "Get them to admit it." I stared at Brittany's name on my screen. The golden child's bride. The woman demanding the perfect day at the cost of my career. The weapon I needed to destroy my father's defense was currently complaining about the color of her floral arrangements. I unlocked my phone, preparing to load the gun. I sat in the cramped legal clinic, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at the message preview on my lock screen. The notification read, "Brittany, we need to talk about your dress. You owe me $500. I had known Brittany for 3 years. She met Jason at a networking mixer hosted by one of Richard's golf buddies. She came from a family obsessed with appearances, social climbing, and curating the perfect Instagram grid. She and Jason were a match, forged in shared narcissism. While Jason failed upwards, shielded by our father's money, Brittany spent her days planning a wedding designed to outshine every influencer she followed. I was merely a prop in her bridal party, required to stand quietly in the background and not detract from her spotlight. I opened the message thread. The history consisted mostly of her sending links to expensive salons and demanding attendance at mandatory dress fittings. The latest block of text was a demanding manifesto. "Brittany, the boutique needs final payment by tomorrow for the blush pink chiffon gowns. Your share is $500. You also haven't sent the $300 for the bachelorette weekend bus rental. I need this handled today, Clara. The $150,000 budget is stretched thin, and I am not fronting your costs." Diane leaned across the desk, peering at the screen. "Is that the bride?" I nodded, watching the typing bubble appear and disappear as Brittany debated adding more demands. Yes, she is asking for money. Diane's eyes narrowed, shifting back into predator mode. "Play dumb," she instructed, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Ask her a direct question about the payment. You need her to confirm the amount, the source, and the destination of the wire. Make her think you are just confused about the budget." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to craft the response carefully. If I sounded suspicious or accusatory, she might call Richard, tipping him off before the bank froze the assets. I had to sound exactly like the naive, compliant scapegoat my family expected me to be. I typed slowly. "Hey, Brittany. Sorry I missed this. I was in class. I am a little confused about the budget. Didn't Dad's $120,000 wire cover the bridal party expenses too? I thought that was supposed to handle everything for the wedding." I hit send. My pulse throbbed in my neck. The 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing. I held my breath, watching the screen. The response arrived seconds later. OMG. Clara, no! Are you serious right now? That money went straight to Lakeside Country Club. Your dad wired the $120,000 directly to the venue coordinator to lock down the catering and the open bar. That does not cover my dresses or the bachelorette party. Do you have any idea how much custom floral arrangements cost? The venue ate all of that trust money. You need to Venmo me the $800 right now, or I am replacing you with my cousin. I stared at the glowing blue text. She had done it. In her narcissistic rage over an $800 delay, she explicitly confirmed the exact amount of the stolen funds, the source of the money, and the final destination of the fraudulent wire transfer. She handed me the legal rope to hang my father. I took a screenshot. The silent flash of the phone capturing the image felt like the shutter of a camera documenting a crime scene. "I got it," I said, turning the screen toward Diane. Diane read the text message, a sharp, satisfied smile cutting across her face. "It is perfect," she declared, sitting back and crossing her arms. "We have the admission of receipt, the confirmation of the non-beneficiary destination, and the exact dollar amount matching the unauthorized wire. This obliterates any defense your father could mount regarding a bank error or a legitimate transfer for your benefit." Diane turned back to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard, finalizing the formal fraud report. "Print that screenshot," she commanded, not looking away from her monitor. "We attach it as Exhibit A to the claim." 30 minutes later, I walked out of the Student Union building holding a thick manila envelope containing the full extent of my retaliation. The autumn wind bit through my sweater, but I felt a strange, detached heat radiating through my chest. I drove straight to the regional headquarters of the bank, located in a sleek glass and steel building in downtown Wilmington. The lobby was an expanse of polished marble and quiet, efficient movement. I approached the reception desk, asking to speak with the regional branch manager regarding a high-priority fraud claim involving a breached trust account. The receptionist, noting the severity of my tone and the thick envelope in my hands, made a quick phone call. Within 5 minutes, I was escorted into a glass-walled office overlooking the city. A man in a sharp gray suit introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, the regional manager. He offered me a seat, his demeanor polite but guarded. I did not engage in small talk. I slid the manila envelope across the polished mahogany desk. "Mr. Harrison," I began, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I am here to report a fraudulent wire transfer of $119,985 from my personal account." He opened the envelope, pulling out the stack of documents. "Fraud is a serious allegation, Ms. West. Let us review the ledger." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page, which displayed my account history. The transfer was authorized by the custodian, Richard West. The security protocols show his digital signature. I leaned forward, tapping the highlighted section of the trust document attached to the ledger. "I turned 21 on September 14th. This is a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account governed by Delaware state law. As of my birthday, Richard West ceased to be the legal custodian." Harrison's polite demeanor vanished. He went rigid. His eyes darted from the birth certificate copy to the trust maturity clause and finally to the date on the wire transfer authorization. The color drained from his face as the magnitude of the liability hit him. "He authorized a transfer 3 weeks after the account matured," I continued, my voice relentless. "Your institution allowed an unauthorized third party to drain a private adult account without securing my signature or verifying his legal standing." Harrison swallowed hard. He picked up his desk phone, dialing a 4-digit internal extension. "Get Henderson down here immediately," he barked into the receiver, referring to the bank's lead fraud investigator. While we waited, I handed him the final piece of paper, the printed screenshot of Brittany's text message. "And this," I said, "is confirmation from the recipient that the funds were not moved for my benefit, but were wired directly to a country club to pay for a private event. Your bank facilitated a six-figure theft to fund a wedding. The door opened, and Henderson, a severe-looking woman with a tablet tucked under her arm, stepped into the office. Harrison handed her the file without a word. She reviewed the documents, her expression growing darker with every page. "This is a Tier 1 breach," Henderson stated, looking at Harrison. "The liability exposure is massive. If this hits the OCC, the fines alone will dwarf the missing principal." "Restore my funds," I demanded, looking directly at the regional manager, "or my next stop is a federal banking regulator and a civil litigation firm." Harrison and Henderson exchanged a loaded glance. The corporate machine recognized a losing battle. "We will initiate an emergency provisional credit while the investigation proceeds," Harrison said, his voice tight. "You will have access to your money within 24 hours. "And my father?" I asked, needing to hear the mechanics of their retaliation. Henderson tapped her tablet, bringing up Richard's financial profile. "We cannot absorb a loss of this magnitude caused by a client's fraudulent authorization. To secure collateral and mitigate our exposure, we are filing a suspicious activity report with federal authorities. Effective immediately, we are executing a hard freeze on every asset, credit line, and account associated with Richard West's Social Security number." The wheels of bureaucratic justice began to turn, silent and absolute. I walked out of the glass building, the afternoon sun warming my face. My tuition was secure, but the financial guillotine had been released, plummeting toward my father's pristine, untouchable credit score. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached my car, an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Richard's name. The automated security protocols had triggered an alert on his phone. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for him to step inside. I sat in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, the engine still off, staring at the incoming call display. Richard West. The digital letters illuminated the dim interior of my car. High up in the glass and steel tower behind me, corporate attorneys and fraud investigators were currently locking down his financial existence. The bank did not waste time. They operated with the cold efficiency of a machine protecting its own capital. Harrison and Henderson had just initiated a suspicious activity report, a federal mechanism that acts like a financial straitjacket. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp autumn chill coming through the cracked window clear my head. I needed to sound compliant. I needed to sound like the timid, obedient daughter they had conditioned for 2 decades. I pressed the accept button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello? Clara. What did you do to your banking application?" My father's voice was sharp, clipped, and layered with a thin veneer of panic masquerading as routine irritation. "I do not know what you mean, Dad." "Do not play games with me," he snapped. "I just received an automated alert from my wealth management portal. It says a provisional security hold has been placed on my primary checking account and the home equity line due to irregular activity linked to your minor trust. Did you report your debit card stolen? Did you fail a login attempt too many times?" I listened to the edge in his voice. He thought it was a technical glitch, an algorithm tripping over a forgotten password or a flagged zip code. His VIP banking representative likely gave him a sanitized version of the situation to avoid tipping off a suspect under active federal review. They called it a security hold. Richard, blinded by his own arrogance, bought the sanitized version without question. He had no idea the regional manager just flagged him for 6-figure wire fraud. "I did not report my card stolen," I replied, keeping my pitch perfectly flat. He released a harsh breath, the sound of a man burdened by an incompetent child. "Well, you triggered something on the back end. The country club needs the final deposit run tomorrow morning for the floral vendor and the upgraded reception lighting package. I cannot have my platinum cards declining at the venue because you cannot manage a simple online password." How do I fix it? I asked, offering him the conversational rope. You need to come to the house right now. I spoke to a representative on the priority service line. They said because the flagged transaction originated from the trust account, the compliance department needs a signed, authorized gift release from you. It just confirms the funds were transferred with your permission for a shared family expense. It is a standard internal form, just a formality. An authorized gift release. The words echoed in the tight space of my car. My father was not just a narcissist. He was a cornered animal acting on raw survival instinct. He knew the transfer was legally gray. He knew taking the money without my signature was a profound risk. Now that a mysterious security hold threatened to derail Jason's perfect luxury weekend, Richard wanted to retroactively paper over a felony. He wanted me to sign away my legal rights, indemnifying him, curing the bank's liability, and leaving me holding the debt for my tuition. I have an anatomy exam to study for, Dad, I said, testing his patience, drawing out his true intentions. Can the bank just fix it on their end? You are the custodian. You have the authority. Let him say it. Let him dig the hole deeper. Clara, I am not asking you, he growled, the irritation in his tone evaporating, leaving only a cold, hard dominance. You will get in your car and you will drive to this house. I stayed silent, letting the dead air stretch. Your brother is getting married in 48 hours, Richard continued, his voice dropping into a menacing register. Your mother is currently in tears in the living room because the venue coordinator just called asking about the payment delay. If you drag your feet on this, if you cause a scene and humiliate this family because of some petty, lingering jealousy over Jason's success, I will cut you out. The threat landed, heavy and practiced. I mean it, Clara. If you do not walk through this front door and sign this compliance form, you will not attend the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. You will not attend the ceremony. I will personally make sure every aunt, uncle, and grandparent knows exactly how spitefully you acted to ruin your brother's milestone. You will be dead to this family. You will be entirely on your own. I listened to the steady hum of traffic passing by on the street outside the bank plaza. 10 years ago, a threat like that would have crushed my chest. I spent my entire childhood twisting myself into different shapes, trying to earn a fraction of the pride he lavished on Jason. I took extra shifts at the diner, scored in the top academic percentiles, and stayed out of trouble, hoping one day Richard would look at me and see an investment worth protecting. I craved the warmth of my mother's approval and the validation of my father's respect. Instead, they looked at my discipline and saw a resource to be harvested. They looked at my independence and saw a bank account they could raid to fund my brother's vanity. The threat of losing a family that only valued me for my compliance was no longer a threat. It was a liberation. They thought the worst punishment they could inflict was isolation. They did not realize isolation was exactly what I needed to burn their house down. Okay, I said, letting my voice waver slightly, feigning the terrified defeat he expected to hear. I am sorry, Dad. I will be there in 20 minutes. Good, he said, his tone instantly shifting back to the smug, authoritative patriarch. Use the side door. Your mother has a headache from all this stress. He ended the call without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone to my lap. The screen went dark. The trap was set. My father believed he held all the leverage. He believed my deep-rooted fear of abandonment would force my hand to the paper, tying off his loose ends and securing his social standing. He wanted me to provide the ink that would save his credit score. I turned the ignition key. The engine sputtered, then caught with a steady rumble. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the bank parking lot, merging into the late afternoon traffic. I was going to drive to the house. I was going to look at his desperate paperwork. And I was going to deliver a performance that would lock the federal cage around him. The fading sunlight cast long, stark shadows across my parents' manicured lawn as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly as it had 48 hours ago, when my future was stolen over a glass of Cabernet. I walked up the paved path, bypassed the heavy oak front door, and entered through the side entrance near the kitchen, exactly as instructed. The air inside felt tense, vibrating with an anxious, impatient energy. My mother, Susan, sat at the kitchen island. A box of tissues rested near her elbow. She dabbed her eyes, adopting a posture of fragile exhaustion. Across from her, my brother Jason slouched against the granite countertops, scrolling through his phone, chewing loudly on a piece of celery from a vegetable platter. My father Richard stood at the head of the island. A single piece of paper, bright white against the dark granite, sat waiting. A heavy, silver fountain pen lay next to it. "You took your time," Richard stated, glancing at his Rolex. "Traffic was heavy on the interstate," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the paper. Susan sighed, a long, trembling sound designed to convey her immense suffering. "The venue coordinator just emailed again, Clara. They are threatening to hold the floral deliveries if the final payment is not cleared by tomorrow morning. I have a migraine. I cannot handle this kind of embarrassment right before the rehearsal dinner. My friends will be there." Jason did not look up from his screen. "Can you just sign whatever it is so we can move on?" he grumbled around a mouthful of celery. "You are causing so much unnecessary drama right now. Brittany is having a meltdown about the lighting package getting delayed." I looked at my brother, the man whose luxury weekend was built entirely on the ashes of my academic career, was annoyed that I was slightly delaying his mood lighting. I felt the familiar heat of anger rise in my chest, but I pushed it down, burying it under a layer of cold, tactical focus. Before I stepped into the kitchen, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. My fingers found the smooth glass of my phone screen. By muscle memory alone, I swiped upward, tapped the icon for the voice memo application, and pressed the red circle. The counter began to run, silently recording every breath in the room. I stepped up to the island and looked down at the document. The header, printed in bold, uncompromising font, read, "Acknowledgement and authorized release of funds." I scanned the dense legal text. Richard had likely directed his personal attorney to draft it in a panic. The document stated that I, Clara West, recognized the $119,985 wire transfer authorized by Richard West as a voluntary, premeditated gift to the family estate. Furthermore, the document contained a backdated timestamp. It stated I granted this authorization 3 weeks ago, 2 days before the funds were actually moved. If I signed this, I would instantly cure the bank's liability. I would validate my father's actions, legally erasing the theft. I would be left with a zero balance, insurmountable debt, and a piece of paper proving I consented to my own financial execution. "This is backdated," I said softly, tracing the date near the bottom margin. "It says I agreed to this 3 weeks ago." Richard crossed his arms, his posture shifting from impatient to aggressive. "It is a compliance formality, Clara. The bank algorithm flagged the timeline of the transfer. This document just aligns the paperwork with the verbal agreement we already had as a family." "We never had a verbal agreement," I pointed out, maintaining a quiet, hesitant tone. "You told me you took the money on Tuesday." Richard stepped closer to the island, his shadow falling across the document. The silver pen glinted under the overhead pendant lights. "The time for discussion is over. You triggered a security hold on my accounts right before the most important weekend of your brother's life. I am not asking for your legal interpretation." He leaned over the counter, closing the physical distance between us. I smelled the sharp, expensive cologne he wore. "Pick up the pen, Clara." I hesitated, letting my hand hover above the granite. What if I do not sign it? What if I want to keep my tuition money? Susan gasped, pulling a tissue from the box and pressing it dramatically to her face. "How can you be so incredibly selfish?" she wailed, her voice thick with manufactured grief. "We gave you everything. We raised you. And you want to humiliate us in front of the entire country club?" Richard slammed his hand flat against the countertop. The sharp crack made Susan jump. Jason finally looked up from his phone, startled by the sudden noise. "You are going to sign this backdated release right now, or you are dead to us," Richard demanded, his voice low, guttural, and dripping with absolute authority. "Do you understand me? If my cards decline tomorrow at that rehearsal dinner because you want to play games, you will pack whatever you have at that cheap apartment and you will consider yourself an orphan. I will cut your phone line. I will drop you from the health insurance. I will make sure not a single member of this family ever speaks your name again. Pick up the pen." The recording app in my pocket captured every syllable. The extortion was crystal clear. He was demanding a backdated signature under the explicit threat of complete familial and financial excommunication. It was exactly what Diane, the paralegal, warned me about. If the bank ever questioned the validity of my signature, I now held the audio proof that it was obtained under profound duress. I looked at the silver fountain pen resting on the granite. Richard expected me to use it. He would undoubtedly inspect the signature the moment the ink dried to ensure his compliance document was flawless. If I wrote void or under duress, he would refuse to let me leave the house until I signed a clean copy. I needed a signature that looked authentic in the moment, but would render the document utterly useless when he tried to deploy it. I reached into my purse, bypassing the wallet and the keys until my fingers brushed against a specific plastic barrel. It was a friction erasable gel pen, a cheap writing tool I used for my anatomy diagrams so I could erase and redraw muscle structures without ruining my notes. The ink in these pens is formulated to turn completely invisible when exposed to high heat. "I prefer my own pen," I murmured, pulling it from my purse and clicking the top. Richard rolled his eyes, a sharp exhale of annoyance. "Just sign the damn paper." I uncapped the gel pen. The ink flowed smoothly across the heavy bond paper. I signed my name with slow, deliberate precision. Clara West. I watched the dark ink settle into the fibers of the document. The signature was perfect. It matched my driver's license. It matched my student ID. It was, for all intents and purposes, a flawless legal execution. I set the pen down and slid the document across the granite island toward my father. Richard picked it up instantly. His eyes scanned the signature line, verifying the name, checking the strokes. A tight, victorious smirk spread across his face. He had won. The compliance issue was solved. The golden child's wedding was secure. "Thank you," he said, his tone instantly shifting back to the smug, patronizing patriarch. "I will scan this and email it to my priority banking representative right now. The hold should be lifted by tomorrow morning. You can head out, Clara," Susan said, dropping the tearful act immediately, returning to her normal, dismissive tone. "We have a lot of finalizing to do for tomorrow. Wear the navy dress to the dinner, please. The floral one you wore last year is looking a bit worn out." I zipped my purse closed. The phone in my pocket continued to record. "Yes, Mom." I turned and walked back toward the side door. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I walked down the driveway to my car, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of absolute victory. Richard was going to take that document into his home office. He was going to place it face down on the glass of his flatbed laser scanner. The scanner bulb would ignite, dragging a blazing, high-intensity beam of light and intense heat across the paper to digitize the image. The heat from the scanner bulb would hit the friction erasable ink. By the time the scanning carriage reached the bottom of the page, my signature would vanish completely. Richard was going to email a blank document to a bank investigator who was currently building a federal wire fraud case against him. I got into my car and stopped the voice recording, saving the file to a secure cloud server. The trap was locked. The bank hold was permanent. Tomorrow night at the rehearsal dinner, Richard was going to hand a declined credit card to a country club manager in front of 60 guests. And I was going to have a front row seat. The morning of the rehearsal dinner dawned crisp and bright, the kind of perfect autumn Delaware day my mother would undoubtedly claim as a personal blessing for her golden child. I woke up in my small off-campus apartment, the ambient noise of a garbage truck grinding down the alley acting as my alarm clock. The air inside my bedroom felt different today. For the past 2 weeks, a heavy, suffocating weight had pressed down on my chest, driven by the panic of losing my academic future. Today, the weight was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp anticipation. I rolled out of bed and crossed the cramped room to my desk. My laptop sat open, the screen displaying a fresh email from the bank's fraud division. The provisional credit had cleared. $119,985 sat safely locked behind a new, secure account number that only I could access. The bank's internal security protocol had worked flawlessly, covering their own immense liability by restoring my stolen funds. But the victory was only half complete. Securing my money was the defensive maneuver. The offensive strike was currently processing through the federal banking system. I printed the digital confirmation of the provisional credit and placed it inside a manila folder. I needed one more piece of administrative armor before facing my family tonight. I showered, pulled on a pair of jeans, and drove to the University Administration Building. The financial aid office was busy. A chaotic swirl of stressed students negotiating payment plans and disputing grant allocations. I waited patiently for 30 minutes before being called to the desk of a tired-looking counselor named Mr. Davis. I did not offer a long, emotional story about family betrayal. The bureaucracy of higher education does not care about tears. It cares about documentation. I handed Mr. Davis the manila folder containing the bank's provisional credit letter and the formal incident number assigned to my fraud claim by the regional security director. I experienced a verified breach of my primary tuition account, I explained, my tone polite but firm. The funds have been provisionally restored by the financial institution, but the transfer clearance requires an additional holding period. I am requesting an emergency administrative extension for the semester balance. Mr. Davis reviewed the documents, his eyes scanning the official bank letterhead and the severe language of the fraud incident report. The tired look vanished, replaced by a professional urgency. Fraud cases involving 6 figures usually expedited the administrative process. He typed the incident number into his terminal, verifying the code against the institutional database. "This documentation is sufficient, Miss West," he said, stamping the file and returning it to me. "I am applying a 7-day emergency hold to your account. Your enrollment status is secured, and your clinical rotation schedule will not be interrupted." I walked out of the administration building with my entire future locked safely back into place. The shield my grandfather forged had absorbed the blow. My father tried to execute my career to fund a cocktail hour, and he failed. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the evening. I pulled the navy blue dress my mother requested from the back of my closet. It was a simple, conservative sheath dress, the kind designed to blend into the background. It was exactly what she wanted me to wear, a visual representation of my secondary status in the family hierarchy. I put it on, smoothing the fabric over my hips. I looked in the mirror. The girl staring back was no longer the compliant, desperate daughter begging for scraps of approval. She was a witness arriving for an execution. My phone buzzed on the dresser. I picked it up. A group text message illuminated the screen. Jason had created a chat titled Wedding Weekend VIPs, including our parents, Brittany, and several of his groomsmen. He was already curating his audience. "Jason, Just finished the walkthrough at Lakeside. The venue looks incredible. Wait until you guys see the lighting setup in the main dining room. The raw bar for the cocktail hour is insane. Open premium bar starts at 7 sharp. Let's go! A barrage of celebrating emojis from the groomsmen followed. Susan chimed in next. Susan, your father really outdid himself this time. The country club manager said this is the most extensive menu they have ever prepared for a rehearsal dinner. We are so proud of you, Jason. I stared at the messages. They were swimming in their own delusion, completely detached from the reality rushing toward them. Jason was boasting about a raw bar funded by stolen money. Susan was praising my father's generosity, ignorant of the fact that his generosity was currently triggering federal alarms in downtown Wilmington. They thought the crisis was averted. They believed the backdated compliance form I signed last night had magically cured the security hold on Richard's accounts. They had no idea my signature vanished under the heat of the scanner, leaving Richard to email a blank piece of paper to an investigator who was actively freezing his assets. I typed a response to the group text, keeping my message brief, devoid of the exclamation points they expected. Clara, cannot wait. See you tonight. I tossed the phone into my purse, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. The drive to Lakeside Country Club took 40 minutes, navigating through the winding, tree-lined roads of the affluent Delaware suburbs. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in deep shades of purple and burnt orange. The transition from day to night mirrored the impending shift in my family's reality. I pulled through the massive wrought iron gates of the country club. The sprawling estate was a monument to exclusivity, featuring a pristine 18-hole golf course and a massive stone clubhouse perched on a hill overlooking a private lake. Valet attendants in crisp white shirts rushed to open car doors for arriving guests. I bypassed the valet, parking my compact car in the overflow lot near the employee entrance. I walked up the long, sweeping staircase to the main terrace. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and expensive perfume. I entered the main foyer. The country club was a symphony of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in black vests circulated with silver trays, offering flutes of champagne and intricate hors d'oeuvres. Through the massive double doors leading into the private dining room, I saw my family. They stood near a towering ice sculpture, holding court. Richard wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, his chest puffed out, holding a glass of champagne like a scepter. He laughed loudly at a joke told by one of Jason's groomsmen, the picture of a relaxed, successful patriarch. Susan stood beside him, draped in a designer gown, touching the arms of passing guests, accepting compliments on the lavish arrangements. Jason and Brittany posed for a photographer near the raw bar, smiling perfectly, projecting the image of a flawless power couple. I stopped near a massive stone pillar, staying just outside their line of sight. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and leaned against the cold stone. I watched them sip their champagne, their faces flushed with the thrill of their own perceived importance. They were so incredibly arrogant. They believed their social standing made them untouchable. They believed my compliance was a permanent, unbreakable law of nature. High up in a corporate office building, an automated banking system was currently executing a hard federal freeze on Richard West's Social Security number. Every checking account, every savings reserve, every platinum credit line, and the massive home equity loan attached to the brick colonial in the cul-de-sac was being digitally locked behind a steel wall of compliance protocol. The financial infrastructure that propped up his entire identity was being dismantled, code by code, while he stood 50 feet away, drinking champagne and boasting about his wealth. The contrast was intoxicating. The tension in the room, invisible to everyone but me, was unbearable and delicious. I took a slow sip of my water, my eyes fixed on the man who tried to sell my future. The music played, the guests laughed, the trap was set, the storm was coming. The private dining room at Lakeside Country Club was designed to overwhelm the senses. It was a cathedral of manufactured prestige. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the moonlit lake. The tables, draped in heavy silver linens, were arranged around a massive, polished oak dance floor. Every detail screamed wealth, excess, and an absolute disregard for cost. It was precisely the kind of environment my parents craved, a stage built entirely to broadcast their success to an audience of extended family and country club acquaintances. I took my assigned seat at a round table near the kitchen doors, practically in the shadows. The placement was deliberate, a physical manifestation of my standing within the family. I was surrounded by distant cousins and the plus ones of groomsmen, people who barely knew my name and showed no interest in learning it. That suited me perfectly. I wanted a clear, unobstructed view of the head table without drawing any attention to myself. The head table was an exercise in offensive opulence. It was elevated on a slight riser, ensuring my parents, Jason and Brittany, looked down on the rest of the room. The centerpiece was a staggering display of floral engineering. Towering hollow glass vases, easily 4 feet high, dominated the table. They were filled with water and hundreds of rare white orchids balancing precariously on thin glass stems. The vases were beautiful, imposing, and incredibly fragile. A single sharp impact would shatter the entire display. It was a perfect, unintentional symbol of the life my father built. The first course arrived, seared scallops with a truffle reduction. The wine flowed freely. The noise level in the room rose as guests relaxed into the luxury of a fully funded evening. As the plates were cleared, a hush fell over the room. The string quartet faded out. Richard stood up at the head table. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound commanded immediate attention. He adjusted the lapels of his custom tuxedo and smiled, scanning the room, basking in the captive audience. "Family, friends, honored guests," Richard began, his voice amplified by a discreet microphone system. His tone was smooth, practiced, and dripping with the arrogant charm he utilized in every boardroom he entered. "Welcome to Lakeside. Susan and I are thrilled to host you all tonight as we kick off a truly spectacular weekend celebrating Jason and Brittany." Applause rippled through the room. Susan dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the overwhelmed, joyful mother to perfection. Jason raised his glass, grinning smugly, while Brittany leaned into him, her diamond catching the light. I sat quietly in the back, sipping my sparkling water. I watched my father deliver his performance. The dramatic irony of the moment was so thick, it was almost tangible. He stood there, holding a glass of champagne that cost more than a week of my groceries, completely unaware that his financial foundation was currently disintegrating. "When you raise a son like Jason," Richard continued, his chest puffing out slightly, "you understand that some moments require you to step up. They require vision. They require a certain level of financial acumen and dedication. We wanted this weekend to reflect the bright future Jason and Brittany are building. We wanted to set a standard." He raised his glass higher, catching the light from the chandeliers. "I have always believed that success is measured by what you can provide for your family. It is about hard work, smart investments, and making sure the people you love have the best start possible. That is why Susan and I spared absolutely no expense for this event. We wanted perfection. And as you can see, we achieved it." More applause. A few guests called out cheers. Richard drank from his glass, savoring the validation. He was taking credit for my grandfather's savings. He was standing in front of 60 people, boasting about his financial genius, when the entire extravagant display was funded by a felony wire transfer stolen from a 21-year-old student. He sat down, clapping Jason on the back. The string quartet resumed playing. The main course, filet mignon and lobster tail, was served. The room buzzed with conversation and the clinking of heavy silverware. From my vantage point near the kitchen, I had a direct line of sight to the main service corridor. The country club manager, a severe-looking man named Mr. Sterling, emerged from the hallway. He wore a sharp black suit and an earpiece, his face usually locked in an expression of polite, invisible servitude. Tonight, his expression was different. He looked agitated. He held a leather billfold tightly against his side. I watched him navigate through the maze of tables. He did not stop to check on guests or adjust the service flow. He moved with a tight, focused urgency directly toward the head table. This was the beginning of conflict layer 5, the subtle tremor before the earthquake. Mr. Sterling approached my father from behind. He leaned down, placing a hand discreetly on the back of Richard's chair, and lowered his head to whisper directly into my father's ear. From my seat, I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language perfectly. Sterling's posture was stiff, apologetic, but firm. Richard, initially annoyed by the interruption during his meal, waved a hand dismissively. Sterling leaned in closer, his whisper growing more insistent. He opened the leather billfold, revealing a credit card receipt, and tapped a specific line of text with his index finger. Richard frowned. He put his fork down, his annoyance shifting to mild confusion. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. He extracted a heavy metal platinum credit card and handed it to Sterling, waving him away with a sharp flick of his wrist. I knew exactly what that conversation entailed. The country club required the final $25,000 payment for the weekend's catering, alcohol, and staffing to be settled the night before the main event. It was standard industry practice. Sterling tried to run the card Richard had on file. The card declined. Richard, blinded by his arrogance, assumed it was a simple fraud alert triggered by a large transaction amount. He handed Sterling a backup card, a different platinum line of credit, assuming the immense weight of his financial standing would clear the hurdle effortlessly. He chuckled, said something to Jason, and picked up his fork, diving back into his expensive steak. He thought the problem was solved. He thought a different piece of plastic would fix a federal freeze. I watched Mr. Sterling walk away from the head table. He did not look relieved. He looked like a man carrying a live grenade. He moved quickly back toward the service corridor, disappearing behind the heavy wooden doors leading to the accounting office. The tension in my chest tightened, winding like a coiled spring. The first card failing was the warning shot. The second card failing would be the execution. I took another sip of my water, my eyes locked on the service doors. The music swelled, the guests laughed. My mother leaned over and kissed Jason's cheek. Brittany snapped a selfie, capturing the glittering hollow vases and the expensive champagne. They were celebrating on a bridge that had already collapsed. They just had not looked down yet to realize there was no ground beneath them. I waited in the shadows. The timing had to be precise. The bank investigator had promised the hold would be absolute, covering every asset linked to my father's Social Security number. If the system functioned correctly, Sterling was currently standing over a credit card terminal, watching the screen reject a second platinum card. He was watching the terminal demand the card be confiscated. The minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 15. The dessert plates, intricate chocolate sculptures dusted with edible gold, were being prepared in the kitchen. The heavy wooden doors of the service corridor swung open again. Mr. Sterling re-emerged. This time, he was not alone. He was flanked by a woman wearing a tailored gray suit holding a tablet. She had the unmistakable, hardened look of a corporate financial director. They were not walking casually. They moved with the grim, synchronized purpose of a firing squad. I set my water glass down on the table. The condensation left a small, dark ring on the white linen. I folded my hands in my lap, leaning forward slightly in my chair. The polite whispers were over. The arrogant chuckles were finished. The federal machine had caught up to the country club terminal, and it was about to deliver the bill to the head table. The ambiance of the room shifted subtly, a slight drop in temperature as Mr. Sterling and the venue's financial director cut through the tables. Guests closest to the central aisle paused their conversations, instinctively sensing the disruption in the carefully curated atmosphere. The string quartet continued playing a soft Vivaldi piece, the classical notes providing an elegant, surreal soundtrack to the incoming devastation. I remained seated in the shadows near the kitchen, my eyes tracking their steady advance. Mr. Sterling no longer wore the deferential mask of a service professional. His jaw was set tight. The financial director, a woman whose posture suggested she dealt regularly with wealthy clients trying to dodge bills, held her tablet like a weapon. They stopped at the edge of the riser, directly in front of the head table. Richard looked up from his filet mignon, his initial confusion souring into visible anger. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and tossed it onto the table. "What is the issue now, Sterling?" Richard demanded, his voice carrying clearly over the music. "I gave you the alternate platinum card. Run it, and let us finish our meal in peace." Susan placed a restraining hand on his arm, flashing a tight, apologetic smile at the nearby guests, attempting to maintain the illusion of control. Jason stopped chewing, looking annoyed at the interruption, while Brittany sighed loudly, picking up her wine glass. "Mr." Sterling did not lean in to whisper this time. He stood straight, his voice projected with professional clarity, loud enough for the immediate tables to hear every syllable. "Mr. West, we attempted to process the alternate card for the remaining $25,000 balance," Sterling stated, his tone devoid of any previous warmth. "It did not simply decline for insufficient funds. The merchant services system returned a code 04. Richard frowned, the technical jargon failing to register immediately. "What does that mean?" "Run it manually. Call the authorization line." The financial director stepped forward, taking point. She looked down at my father with the cold evaluation of an auditor. "A code 04 is a direct mandate from the issuing bank, Mr. West," she explained, her voice cutting through the remaining chatter at the surrounding tables. "It means pick up card." The terminal instructed us to physically confiscate the plastic. The bank has placed a hard fraud freeze on the account. The word fraud hung over the head table, heavy and toxic. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Jason sat up straight, the annoyance vanishing, replaced by sudden alarm. Brittany's eyes darted between Richard and the financial director, her grip tightening on her wine glass. "That is impossible," Richard snapped, his face flushing dark red. His voice rose, the volume echoing off the high ceilings. "I have excellent standing with that institution. This is a mistake. Bring me the terminal." "Sir," the director continued, her tone unyielding, "we contacted your bank's merchant verification line directly to resolve the issue. They informed us that a global security hold has been placed on your entire financial portfolio. They cannot authorize any transactions, and they advised us to secure alternative payment immediately, or they will not guarantee funds for this event." Richard's arrogance cracked, revealing the raw panic underneath. He shoved his chair back, the heavy wood scraping loudly against the floor. The sound drew the attention of the entire room. The string quartet faltered, a single violin note dragging out awkwardly before the musicians stopped playing altogether. 60 guests fell silent, their eyes locked on the unfolding spectacle at the head table. "This is absurd," Richard sputtered, his hands patting his tuxedo pockets frantically. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked the screen. "I will show you. The funds are there. I just cleared a security flag yesterday." He opened his banking application. I watched from the back of the room, my pulse hammering a steady rhythm in my ears. I knew exactly what he was about to see. The application loaded. The bright screen reflected off his face, illuminating the sudden, devastating realization spreading across his features. The interface, usually displaying a comforting list of robust balances, was a graveyard of red text. Checking account, balance unavailable. Account suspended, savings reserve, balance unavailable. Account suspended, home equity line of credit, balance unavailable. Account suspended. At the top of the screen, a glaring banner alert flashed. Federal compliance hold. Contact Regional Fraud Division immediately. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth open, breath hitching in his throat. The financial foundation that defined his entire existence, the credit score he worshipped, the wealth he used as a weapon to control our family, was gone. It had been digitized into oblivion by a bureaucratic algorithm. He swiped down on the screen, desperately refreshing the page, hoping the red text would vanish. The screen reloaded, displaying the exact same message. Account suspended. He had bragged about his financial acumen just 20 minutes ago. He told me that in the adult world, his name and his credit limit were all that mattered. The foreshadowing he delivered in our kitchen had arrived with lethal precision. His name was now tied to a federal fraud investigation, and his credit limit was 0. Susan leaned over, trying to read the screen over his shoulder. "Richard, what is it? What does it say?" she asked, her voice tight with rising panic. He did not answer her. He slowly lowered the phone, his hands shaking violently now. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt. The aura of the untouchable patriarch shattered, leaving behind a terrified man staring at the ruins of his reputation. "Mr. West," the financial director prompted, shattering the silence. "We need alternative payment tonight. The venue cannot proceed with tomorrow's wedding schedule without securing the balance. Do you have another form of payment that is not tied to this institution?" Richard looked at her, his eyes wide and unfocused. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "It is all tied to that Social Security number. All of it." The silence in the dining room was absolute. The guests, including Brittany's wealthy, status-obsessed parents sitting at the adjacent table, heard every word. The wealthy, generous host was broke. His cards were confiscated. His accounts were frozen. The lavish dinner they were currently eating was unpaid for. Richard's head snapped up. The confusion in his eyes morphed into a sudden, vicious realization. He remembered the compliance form. He remembered the side door entrance, the friction erasable pen, the signature he emailed to the bank. He realized the form was useless. He realized the trap he thought he set for me was actually the cage locking around him. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping over the bewildered guests, bypassing the catering staff, until he found me sitting in the shadows near the kitchen. Our eyes locked across the distance. He looked at me with a mixture of absolute fury and profound terror. He expected to see me cowering, shrinking away from his gaze, terrified of the scene unfolding. He expected the compliant scapegoat. I did not shrink. I did not look away. I sat perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression neutral. The invisible scale that governed our family dynamic had permanently tipped. The leverage he held over me for 21 years was gone. I reached out and picked up my water glass. The condensation felt cool against my fingers. While Richard stood frozen at the head table, his financial life burning to the ground in front of 60 witnesses, I slowly raised the glass in his direction. A silent, solitary toast. The gesture broke the spell. Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He threw his phone onto the table. The heavy device struck a wine glass, shattering the crystal. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent dining room. The collision of my silent victory and his public destruction ignited the fuse. He shoved past Susan, his heavy chair toppling backward off the riser and crashing onto the dance floor. The fragile facade of the rehearsal dinner shattered completely. The polite country club atmosphere vanished, replaced by the raw, explosive energy of a desperate man with nothing left to lose. Richard began to march across the dining room, cutting a path straight toward my table. The conflict layer was no longer subtle. It was violent, public, and unavoidable. The storm I had been waiting for finally broke, and it was heading right for me. The distance between the head table and my seat in the shadows felt vast just moments ago. Now that space vanished under the heavy, rapid strides of my father. Richard marched across the polished oak dance floor, his expensive leather shoes cracking against the wood like warning shots. He did not care about the spectacle he was creating. The veneer of the sophisticated patriarch had burned away, leaving only a cornered, frantic man desperate to regain control. He reached back and grabbed Susan by the wrist, pulling her along in his wake. She stumbled slightly in her heels, her face a portrait of bewildered terror. Jason followed closely behind them, his initial annoyance morphing into a dark, defensive anger. He left Brittany sitting alone at the head table, her eyes wide as she watched her future unravel. As they closed the distance, the ambient noise in the dining room died. The clinking of heavy silver forks against porcelain plates ceased entirely. Waiters carrying trays of clear dishes froze in their tracks, stepping back against the walls to avoid the incoming storm. 60 guests held their collective breath, their attention riveted on the impending collision. I did not remain seated. Staying in my chair would force me to look up at them, preserving the physical hierarchy they had enforced my entire life. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that signaled my refusal to submit. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my conservative navy dress. I squared my shoulders, locked my knees, and waited. Richard stopped 3 feet away from me. His chest heaved, straining the fabric of his custom tuxedo. The veins in his neck stood out, pulsing with adrenaline. His face was a dark, mottled red, the veins in his eyes prominent and wild. "What did you do to us?" he screamed. The volume of his voice shattered the fragile quiet of the room. It was not a question. It was a desperate accusation, roared from the depths of a man who watched his empire evaporate on a 6-inch smartphone screen. The acoustics of the high-ceilinged dining room caught his voice and amplified it, sending the raw, unhinged sound bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the towering glass centerpieces. I did not flinch. I did not step back. The terrified girl who used to memorize his moods to avoid his wrath no longer existed. I reported a $120,000 theft from a matured trust, Dad, I replied. My voice was not loud, but the sheer, icy precision of my tone carried just as far as his scream. The specific dollar amount hit the room like a physical blow. I heard a sharp intake of breath from a table nearby. The bank is just following federal law, I added, holding his furious gaze. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. The mention of federal law stripped away his last defense. He could not bully his way out of an active investigation. He could not intimidate an algorithm. Susan threw herself into the narrow space between us. She unleashed her favorite weapon, the one she had wielded for decades to manipulate every narrative in our home. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her careful makeup. She clasped her hands together, pressing them to her chest in a display of profound, manufactured agony. "Clara, how could you do this tonight?" she wailed, her voice pitching into a theatrical sob. "Look around you. You are embarrassing us in front of everyone. We are your family. You are ruining your brother's beautiful weekend over a stupid misunderstanding." I looked at my mother. Her tears used to paralyze me with guilt. Now they just looked pathetic. Even facing total financial ruin, her primary concern was the aesthetic of the evening. She cared more about the opinions of the country club members watching us than the fact her husband had just committed a felony. "There is no misunderstanding, Mom," I said, keeping my tone clinical and detached. You stole the money that was supposed to pay for my medical degree to buy shrimp cocktails and orchids. I am just holding you accountable." Susan choked on a sob, reaching out to grab my arm. I stepped back smoothly, denying her the physical contact she craved to anchor her victimhood. She dropped her hands, looking around the room, hoping to find sympathetic faces in the crowd. She found none. The guests were staring in unvarnished horror. The performance was failing because the stakes were no longer a petty family dispute. They were witnessing the exposure of a crime. Jason shoved past our mother, stepping directly into my personal space. He was taller than me, broader, and fueled by a lifetime of unchallenged entitlement. He pointed a rigid finger inches from my face. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed in a glare of pure, unfiltered arrogance. "Get on your phone right now," Jason demanded, his voice a low, threatening hiss. "Call whoever you need to call at that bank and clear this up. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them whatever they need to hear to release those funds. You are not going to cancel my wedding because you decided to throw a temper tantrum." I stared at my brother. 28 years of having his messes erased. 28 years of watching our parents pave over his failures with their checkbook. He truly believed this was just another customer service issue. He thought the federal banking system operated like a retail store manager he could complain to until he got his way. He thought I possessed a magic button that could pause the consequences of his lavish lifestyle. I let a moment of silence pass, allowing his ridiculous demand to settle in the air. "I cannot authorize transactions on your accounts, Jason," I said, my voice steady, dropping the pebble of reality directly onto his fragile ego. "But neither can Dad, since he committed a felony." The word felony severed the last remaining thread of decorum in the room. It was a sharp, ugly word, and it echoed outward, carrying straight to the adjacent tables. The guests, who had been holding their breath, collectively exhaled in shock. The whispering began. It started as a low murmur near the back and rapidly surged forward, a tidal wave of gossip and realization spreading from table to table. Did she say stolen? $120,000. He took her trust fund. The hushed voices merged into a chaotic symphony of scandal. The entire facade of the perfect, wealthy West family disintegrated into dust. The narrative of the generous patriarch providing a luxury experience for his successful son was dead. In its place stood the reality of a broke, fraudulent man who robbed his youngest daughter to maintain an illusion. I watched the realization hit my extended family. Uncle David, Richard's older brother, slowly lowered his wine glass to the table, his face pale with disgust. Aunt Carol covered her mouth with her napkin, shaking her head. The people who had praised Richard's generosity mere minutes ago were now pulling away, creating an invisible perimeter around our toxic standoff. But the most crucial reaction did not come from my blood relatives. It came from the table positioned closest to the riser. Brittany's parents, the wealthy, status-obsessed in-laws who had looked down their noses at my cheap clothes and quiet demeanor, had heard every single word. Brittany's father, a man who built his fortune in real estate and protected his public reputation with ruthless efficiency, pushed his chair back. His face was a mask of cold, calculating outrage. He looked at Richard, then at Jason, processing the sudden, terrifying truth that his daughter was about to tie herself legally and financially to a family currently plunging into a federal abyss. He threw his linen napkin onto his plate and stood up, his towering frame blocking the view of the lake behind him. The whispers in the room faltered as he began to move. The focus of the disaster shifted from my retaliation to the immediate, devastating fallout. The in-laws were entering the battlefield, and they were not bringing mercy. Brittany's father, Arthur Sterling, was a man accustomed to commanding rooms. He amassed his wealth through a chain of high-end auto dealerships across the tri-state area. He operated on the principle that image was everything, aggressively curating his family's social standing. He viewed his daughter's wedding not as a celebration of love, but as a strategic merger. He had spent the last 2 hours drinking top-shelf scotch, content in the knowledge that Richard West possessed the financial gravity necessary to absorb his daughter's expensive tastes. That illusion vanished the moment Arthur stood up. He moved past the terrified caterers and the whispering guests, his heavy steps eating up the distance between his table and the volatile cluster of my family. His wife, a woman whose face was stretched tight with panic and expensive cosmetic procedures, hurried closely behind him. "What the hell is going on here, Richard?" Arthur boomed, his deep voice slicing through the lingering murmurs in the dining room. Richard pivoted away from me, desperate to manage the sudden arrival of his most important audience. The furious, screaming patriarch disappeared, replaced instantly by the smooth, backpedaling salesman. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Arthur, please, it is nothing," Richard stammered, his voice lacking its usual resonant confidence. "It is just a minor administrative glitch. A banking error. We are sorting it out right now." "A banking error?" Arthur repeated, his tone laced with heavy skepticism. He looked past Richard, scanning the room, until he spotted the venue manager and the financial director hovering near the service doors. "The country club management just informed us that your cards were confiscated, Richard. They told me that if the $25,000 balance is not cleared tonight, the entire wedding schedule tomorrow is void." Susan rushed to Arthur's side, placing a trembling hand on his jacket sleeve. "Arthur, Margaret, please do not worry," she pleaded, tears still shining on her cheeks. "Clara is just being difficult. She is incredibly jealous of Jason and Brittany's happiness. She caused a delay with an old family account, but Richard will have it fixed by morning." She pointed an accusing finger at me, leaning hard into the narrative of the bitter, unstable sibling. "She is throwing a tantrum to ruin the weekend. That is all this is." Arthur looked at me. His expression was a mix of intense scrutiny and profound annoyance. He did not care about family dynamics or petty jealousies. He cared about the humiliation of 60 guests watching a declined credit card. "Listen to me," Arthur said, turning back to Richard, his voice dropping into a hard, uncompromising register. "I do not care about your daughter's tantrums. I do not care about your banking glitches. I care that my daughter is sitting up there terrified that her wedding is going to be canceled because you cannot manage your liquidity. Are you telling me you cannot clear a simple $25,000 charge right now?" Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight tuxedo collar. The panic in his eyes was naked and absolute. "Arthur, my accounts are under a temporary security review. If you could just front the catering balance for tonight, I will write you a check the moment the hold is lifted on Monday. I promise you, the funds are there." Arthur stared at Richard, absorbing the request. The wealthy, generous host who had just delivered a 20-minute speech about his financial acumen was now begging his future-in-law for a bridge loan in front of a silent audience. The desperation was palpable, thick, and humiliating. Before Arthur could respond, before he could reach for his own wallet to salvage the event, I knew I had to deploy the final piece of evidence. I could not let Richard maintain the illusion that the money existed. I had to show Arthur exactly what kind of criminal enterprise he was marrying his daughter into. I reached into my small evening bag and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, navigating past the blank home display directly to the photo gallery. I found the image I saved days ago in the legal clinic. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tense silence. "It is not a banking glitch. He does not have the money. He never did." Arthur turned toward me, his brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" I took 2 steps forward, closing the distance, and held my phone out, extending the screen toward Arthur. "Read it," I instructed. Arthur took the phone. He adjusted his stance, squinting slightly at the bright display. His wife leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the digital text. It was the screenshot of the text message thread between Brittany and me. The message where she aggressively demanded $500 for her blush pink bridesmaid dress. And more importantly, the message where she confessed exactly where the venue deposit originated. Arthur read his daughter's words in silence. Your dad wired the $120,000 directly to the venue coordinator to lock down the catering and the open bar. That does not cover my dresses. The venue ate all of that trust money. Arthur finished reading. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and defining. The color drained from his face, leaving his complexion a sickly, ashen gray. He lowered the phone, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent realization of the trap he had nearly stepped into. He looked at Richard. The scrutiny was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated disgust. You stole her trust fund, Arthur stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You wired stolen money to this venue to pay for the deposit. Richard recoiled as if physically struck. Arthur, let me explain. It is a family asset. We were restructuring. You are broke, Arthur interrupted, his voice rising, cutting off Richard's frantic backpedaling. You do not have a temporary security hold. You have a federal freeze. You brought my daughter into this family, you planned a luxury event, and you funded the entire thing with stolen cash. You are under federal investigation. Susan let out a high-pitched wail, covering her face with her hands, finally realizing that the damage control had completely failed. Jason stood frozen, his arrogant posture crumbling as the gravity of his father's actions and his own impending ruin settled over him. Arthur turned to the venue manager, who was standing a few feet away, watching the exchange with professional detachment. Mr. Sterling, Arthur called out, his tone sharp and decisive. I am assuming the contract for tomorrow is null and void without final payment tonight? Yes, sir, the venue manager confirmed immediately. Company policy dictates that without cleared funds 24 hours prior, all services are terminated. The event is officially canceled. Arthur did not hesitate. He did not reach for his wallet. He did not offer to save the weekend. A man like Arthur Sterling does not throw good money into a burning building, especially when the fire was started by a federal felony. We are leaving, Arthur announced, grabbing his wife's arm. He turned away from Richard, dismissing him entirely, and marched toward the head table where Brittany sat alone, crying silently, her mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Brittany, get up, her father ordered, his voice echoing through the silent dining room. We are going home. The wedding is off. Brittany stood up slowly, her hands shaking. She looked at her father, then shifted her gaze down to the dance floor where Jason stood amidst the ruins of his family. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. The golden child she thought she was marrying was penniless. The luxurious lifestyle she expected was a mirage, funded by a stolen trust account. She was not marrying into wealth. She was marrying into a federal indictment. Jason took a step toward her, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Brittany, please, wait. We can fix this. We can go to the courthouse on Monday. I love you. Brittany stared at him, her expression hardening from despair into raw, visceral anger. She looked at the expensive floral arrangements, the crystal chandeliers, and the 60 silent guests watching her humiliation. She raised her left hand, her fingers trembling as she grasped the heavy diamond engagement ring on her finger. With a sharp, violent pull, she yanked the ring off. Fix this, Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and profound embarrassment. You are a fraud, Jason. Your whole family is a fraud. You let your father steal from your sister so you could pretend you were rich. I am not marrying a criminal who cannot even pay for his own catering. She drew her arm back and threw the engagement ring. The heavy diamond struck Jason squarely in the center of his chest. It bounced off his tuxedo shirt and clattered onto the hardwood floor, spinning erratically before coming to a stop near his father's shoes. Brittany did not wait to see his reaction. She spun on her heel, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the floor, and stormed out of the dining room, following her parents. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them, sealing the fate of the evening. The golden child's wedding was officially dead. The bride was gone. The wealthy in-laws had retreated. Richard West stood in the center of the room, surrounded by silent, staring guests, looking down at the discarded diamond ring resting near his feet. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Susan's muffled sobbing. The social execution was complete. But the night was not over. The legal consequences of the explosion were already in motion, and the flashing lights reflecting against the large bay windows signaled their arrival. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung shut, swallowing the retreating figures of Arthur Sterling and his humiliated family. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from stunned silence to a frantic, restless energy. Guests began gathering their coats and purses, moving quickly toward the exits, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the West family collapse. Waitstaff, reading the room with professional intuition, started clearing the untouched desserts, effectively signaling the end of the evening. Richard did not move to stop the mass exodus. He stood, anchored to the spot, his eyes fixed on the discarded diamond ring resting near his polished shoes. The reality of his absolute ruin was descending upon him, a crushing weight that stripped away the last remnants of his composed patriarch persona. The silence shattered when the venue manager, Mr. Sterling, stepped forward, holding a clipboard against his chest. "Mr. West," he said, his voice stripped of all hospitality, "I must ask you and your remaining party to vacate the premises. The catering staff will begin breaking down the event setup immediately. We will issue a formal invoice for tonight's services to your address on file." The calm, bureaucratic dismissal acted like a match thrown onto dry kindling. Richard's shock mutated instantly into a raw, volatile rage. "Vacate!" Richard roared, his head snapping up. The veins in his forehead bulged, pulsing with a dangerous, erratic rhythm. "I paid a $120,000 deposit to this club. You took my money. You are not breaking down anything." He lunged past the manager, his heavy strides carrying him toward the temporary bar set up near the terrace doors. The bartender, a young man in a white shirt and black vest, stepped back nervously as Richard reached over the mahogany counter. He grabbed two heavy, unopened bottles of premium scotch by the necks. "These belong to me," Richard shouted, his voice cracking, spit flying from his lips. "I paid for this inventory. I am taking what is mine." "Sir, put the bottles down," Sterling commanded, stepping quickly behind Richard, his hand reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. "This is club property. Your deposit covered event allocation, not physical inventory removal. Put them down or I will contact local authorities." Richard spun around, gripping the bottles like clubs. He was no longer a wealthy businessman negotiating a contract. He was a cornered, desperate man lashing out blindly against his loss of control. He took a wide, aggressive step forward, intending to push past the manager. His expensive leather shoe caught the edge of the heavy decorative rug positioned beneath the head table. He stumbled. His arms flailed as he fought to regain his balance, the heavy glass bottles throwing off his center of gravity. His shoulders slammed hard into the edge of the raised platform supporting the head table. The impact sent a violent shudder through the table structure. The towering 4-foot-high hollow glass centerpiece, filled to the brim with water and expensive white orchids, wobbled precariously. The delicate equilibrium was broken. It tilted sharply, hovered for a fraction of a second, and then fell forward. The crash was catastrophic. The heavy glass vase struck the hardwood dance floor with a deafening, explosive sound. It shattered into thousands of jagged, glittering shards, sending a tidal wave of water and ruined orchids sprawling across the polished oak. the symbolic manifestation of Jason's perfect life, hollow, fragile, and built entirely on unstable ground, lay destroyed at Richard's feet. Susan screamed, jumping back as water splashed against the hem of her designer gown. Jason froze, staring blankly at the destruction, completely incapable of managing a crisis he could not buy his way out of. The venue manager did not hesitate. He unclipped the radio from his belt, pressed the transmit button, and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Security, initiate a code blue in the main dining room. Contact local dispatch. We have a hostile guest destroying club property." The escalation was instantaneous. The private family dispute had officially breached the walls of domestic conflict, crashing headlong into the realm of public law enforcement. Within minutes, the pulsing reflection of blue and red lights illuminated the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. 2 local police officers, clad in dark blue uniforms with heavy utility belts, strode through the main double doors. They moved with the calm, authoritative presence of individuals trained to de-escalate chaotic situations. The lead officer, a tall man with a shaved head and a sharp gaze, quickly assessed the scene. The shattered glass, the spilled water, the terrified guests hovering near the exit, and my father standing in the center of the wreckage, still clutching the 2 bottles of scotch. "Sir, place the bottles on the bar and step away," the officer instructed, his voice projecting clearly over the ambient noise, carrying a tone that did not invite negotiation. Richard blinked, the presence of uniformed law enforcement finally penetrating his rage. He looked at the bottles in his hands as if he had just realized he was holding them. The adrenaline drained from his posture, replaced by a sudden, sinking realization of his profound vulnerability. He slowly placed the scotch on the bar and took 2 steps back, raising his hands slightly. The second officer moved to intercept the venue manager, pulling a small notepad from his breast pocket to take the initial complaint regarding the property damage and attempted theft. The lead officer approached my father, maintaining a safe, evaluative distance. "Are you Richard West?" the officer asked. "Yes," Richard mumbled, his voice hoarse and defeated. "We received a call regarding a disturbance and property damage," the officer stated, his eyes scanning Richard's disheveled tuxedo. "We are going to separate the parties to determine exactly what transpired here tonight." While the officer began questioning Richard, pulling him toward a quiet corner near the coat check, a sharp, repetitive buzzing sound cut through the tense atmosphere. It was Richard's cell phone, vibrating violently against the mahogany bar where he had tossed it earlier during his confrontation with me. The screen illuminated, displaying the caller ID, Martin Hayes, Esquire. It was his personal attorney, the man Richard paid heavily to manage his contracts, shield his assets, and clean up his legal liabilities. Jason, looking desperate for any lifeline, snatched the phone off the bar and answered the call. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice trembling, "this is Jason. My dad is talking to the police right now. We need you to come down to Lakeside Country Club immediately. They are trying to charge him for a broken vase." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the attorney finally spoke, the volume of his voice was loud enough that I could hear the tinny, distorted words bleeding through the phone speaker. "Jason, listen to me very carefully," Martin Hayes said, his tone devoid of its usual polished confidence, sounding strained and urgent. "Hand the phone to your father the second he is clear. Do not say another word to law enforcement. This is not about a broken vase." "What are you talking about?" Jason asked, confusion twisting his features. "I just received an emergency notification from the regional compliance director at your father's primary banking institution," the attorney explained, the words dropping like lead weights into the silent space around us. "The bank's fraud division executed a hard freeze on his entire portfolio 4 hours ago. They filed a suspicious activity report, Jason, ASAR. They flagged a 6-figure wire transfer originating from a matured Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account. Jason stared at the phone, his mouth slightly open, completely unequipped to process the magnitude of the information. What does that mean? It means the bank has formally referred the transaction to federal authorities, Hayes stated bluntly, stripping away the legal jargon. This is no longer a civil dispute over a catering bill. Your father is currently the subject of an active federal wire fraud investigation. He needs to secure criminal counsel immediately. I do not handle federal defense. Jason lowered the phone, his arm dropping to his side. The color drained from his face entirely. He looked at his father, currently answering questions from a local beat cop, completely unaware that a federal net had just closed tightly around his neck. Susan, who had been hovering near Jason, heard enough of the tinny voice from the speaker to understand the catastrophic shift in their reality. The performance of the grieving, humiliated mother vanished, replaced by genuine, unadulterated panic. She turned toward me, her eyes wide, realizing that the daughter she had dismissed as collateral damage held the key to their survival. "Clara, please," Susan begged, closing the distance between us, reaching out to grab both of my hands. Her grip was tight, desperate, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You have to stop this. You have to call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell the police you misunderstood the transfer. If you do not retract this report, they are going to send your father to prison. We will lose the house. We will lose everything." I looked down at my mother's hands gripping mine. These were the same hands that had picked lint off my sweater 2 days ago, treating me like a minor inconvenience. These were the hands that helped orchestrate the theft of my medical career to fund a cocktail hour. I did not pull away. I let her feel the cold, rigid stillness in my posture. I looked directly into her tear-filled eyes, feeling an immense, terrifying clarity settle over me. The final layer of guilt, the last remnant of the daughter who craved their approval, evaporated completely. "You told me family means sacrifice, Mom," I said, my voice low, perfectly steady, echoing the exact phrase Richard used in our living room. Susan's breath hitched, recognizing her own weapon turned against her. "I am sacrificing your comfort for my future," I finished. I pulled my hands free from her grasp. She stumbled back a step, covering her mouth, a low moan escaping her throat. The second police officer, having finished taking the venue manager's statement regarding the shattered centerpiece, approached me, notepad in hand. "Miss," he said politely, "I understand you were present during the initial altercation. Can I get your statement regarding the events leading up to the property damage?" I turned my back on my mother. "Yes, officer," I replied, my voice clear and cooperative. I spent the next 10 minutes calmly detailing the chronological sequence of events, explaining the declined credit cards and the subsequent verbal escalation, ensuring the police report accurately reflected Richard's unprovoked hostility and destruction of club property. I provided my contact information and my university address. When I finished, I thanked the officer, zipped my purse closed, and walked toward the main exit. I did not look back at the shattered glass, the ruined orchids, or the 2 terrified people standing in the wreckage of their own making. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the terrace. The cool night air hit my face, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. The sky above was clear, filled with sharp, indifferent stars. I walked down the sweeping staircase toward the overflow parking lot, the sound of my footsteps steady and definitive against the pavement, leaving the burning building entirely behind me. Saturday morning broke with a dull, gray, overcast sky, casting a muted light through the blinds of my small apartment. Today was supposed to be the main event. Today, Jason was supposed to stand at an altar covered in expensive, imported flowers, looking out at 200 seated guests while a string quartet played him into the next phase of his curated life. Instead, the day was defined by the silence of a canceled future. I sat at my small kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee, watching the digital clock on the stove tick past 11 a.m. In a parallel universe, caterers were currently setting up a carving station, and my mother was barking orders at a terrified wedding planner. In reality, delivery trucks were likely backing up to the loading dock at Lakeside Country Club, hauling away unlit candles, folded linens, and hundreds of pounds of unprepared food that the venue would write off as a total loss against my father's ruined credit. My phone, resting on the table next to my coffee mug, vibrated aggressively. It had been vibrating constantly since I left the country club last night. The notification screen was a chaotic waterfall of missed calls, frantic text messages, and unread voicemails. The fallout was arriving. Heavy and relentless. I ignored the texts from extended family members demanding explanations and fishing for gossip. I bypassed the angry, misspelled messages from Susan, accusing me of destroying my brother's life. I went straight to the voicemail application, preparing to catalog the damage. The first message was from Jason. I pressed play, anticipating the usual arrogant demands and entitled fury. I did not expect the sound that actually came through the speaker. Clara. It was Jason, but his voice was broken, thick with congestion and a deep, guttural despair. Please call me back. Brittany is gone. She sent her father's assistant to the house this morning to collect her things. She blocked my number. Her dad called the venue and officially canceled everything. I have nothing, Clara. The groomsmen will not return my texts. The honeymoon is canceled. Please, just tell the bank it was a mistake so we can fix this. I am begging you. I listened to the message twice. For 28 years, Jason operated under the delusion that he was the architect of his own success. He believed his charm, his golf swing, and his network made him untouchable. He never realized he was standing on a scaffolding built entirely by his parents' checkbook. The moment the funding evaporated, the facade crumbled. Brittany did not love Jason. She loved the lifestyle Jason represented. When the lifestyle was exposed as a fraudulent mirage, she excised him from her life with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate restructuring. I deleted the voicemail. I did not feel satisfaction listening to him cry. I felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. He was finally experiencing the consequences of his actions, and the reality was crushing him. The next voicemail was not from a family member. The caller ID displayed a local 302 area code, but the number was unfamiliar. I pressed play. Ms. West, my name is David Thorne. I am the criminal defense attorney recently retained by your father, Richard West. His voice was smooth, carrying the practiced cadence of a man who negotiated high-stakes settlements for a living. I am calling to discuss a potential resolution regarding the pending financial dispute. My client acknowledges the irregularity of the recent transfer from the trust account. In the interest of family preservation, we are prepared to offer a full, immediate restitution. I set my coffee mug down, leaning closer to the phone, my focus sharpening. The legal machinery was attempting a bypass maneuver. If you agree to formally withdraw the fraud complaint with the Regional Banking Authority and sign a non-disclosure agreement, Thorne continued, the negotiation tactics slick and confident, Richard will execute a secondary mortgage against his primary residence this afternoon. The entire principal of $120,000 will be wired directly to an account of your choosing by Monday morning. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to finalize the paperwork. I stopped the playback. The audacity of the offer was staggering. Richard, facing a federal wire fraud indictment, thought he could buy his way out of a felony by leveraging the equity in his house to reimburse the money he stole. He wanted me to act as an accomplice after the fact, aiding in the cover-up of a federal crime in exchange for a payout. If I called the bank and withdrew the fraud report, telling them I suddenly remembered authorizing the wire transfer, the federal investigators would not simply drop the case. They would investigate the sudden reversal. They would scrutinize the new influx of cash from a second mortgage. And when they uncovered the coercion, I would be legally implicated in obstructing a federal inquiry. Richard wanted me to risk my own freedom to save his. I did not delete the voicemail. I exported the audio file, saving a digital copy to my secure cloud server. The voicemail was not a settlement offer. It was evidence of attempted witness tampering. I forwarded the audio file directly to Diane at the legal clinic, adding a brief note. Richard's new defense attorney attempting a buyout. Thought you might want this for the file. I closed the email application, feeling a grim satisfaction. I had navigated the emotional minefield of my family's collapse and the legal landmines of their defense strategy. The perimeter was secure. Then, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed the corporate number for the regional bank headquarters. I answered immediately. Clara West. Ms. West, this is Agent Henderson with the bank's internal fraud division. Her voice was crisp, professional, and completely devoid of the tension that characterized our first meeting. I am calling to provide an update on the forensic audit regarding the unauthorized transfer from the UTMA account. I appreciate the update, Agent Henderson. Has the provisional credit cleared the internal hold? The credit is secure, Ms. West. Your funds are unencumbered, she confirmed, delivering the final piece of financial reassurance. However, that is not the primary reason for my call. Our forensic accounting team completed the trace on the routed funds, following the money from the trust account through the clearinghouse to the final destination accounts. Destination accounts, I asked, catching the plural. Brittany's text message indicated the entire $120,000 was wired directly to Lakeside Country Club. That is the discrepancy, Henderson explained, the rhythm of her typing audible in the background. The venue contract for the wedding weekend required a total deposit of exactly $100,000. The ledger reflects a wire transfer to Lakeside Country Club for that specific amount. I frowned, processing the numbers, but the trust was drained completely. The transfer receipt showed $119,985. Where did the remaining $20,000 go? That is what our audit uncovered, Henderson said, her tone carrying the grim satisfaction of an investigator uncovering a hidden motive. The remaining $19,985 was routed through a secondary clearing protocol and deposited directly into a high-yield, unsecured credit card account. A credit card account? Whose? The account is registered solely under the name Susan West, Henderson stated. The transaction history indicates the card carried a substantial revolving balance accumulated through luxury retail merchants and high-end cosmetic clinics over the past 3 years. The diverted trust funds were utilized to completely liquidate that specific debt. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the silence of my apartment amplifying the sheer magnitude of the revelation. My mother, the woman who spent my entire life lecturing me about financial responsibility, the woman who picked lint off my sweater and called me selfish for demanding my tuition money, the woman who stood in the middle of a country club dining room and wailed that I was destroying the family. She did not just enable my father's theft to fund Jason's wedding. She actively participated in the heist. She used my grandfather's money to secretly pay off $20,000 of hidden luxury credit card debt she had been concealing from my father. The unified front my parents presented, the solid, unshakable alliance of the wealthy patriarch and the devoted matriarch, was a lie built on top of a lie. Susan stole from me to cover her tracks, allowing Richard to take the fall for the entire wire transfer. Knowing the bank would focus the investigation on the primary custodian, she sacrificed my future to buy herself out of a hole, and then she let my father stand in front of federal crosshairs without mentioning a word about her own embezzlement. "Thank you, Agent Henderson," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the adrenaline surging through my system. "That information is extremely helpful." I ended the call. The final, devastating weapon had just been handed to me by a corporate auditor. I did not need to confront my mother. I did not need to scream or demand an apology. I needed to detonate the bomb directly inside the center of their toxic marriage. I opened the text message application on my phone. I initiated a new message, selecting only one recipient, Richard. I kept the message brief, delivering the facts with the cold, surgical precision of a coroner determining a cause of death. Clara. The bank's forensic audit just completed the trace on the wire transfer. Lakeside Country Club only received $100,000. The missing $20,000 was routed directly to a secret credit card account solely in Mom's name to pay off 3 years of hidden luxury retail debt. She stole from the trust to cover her tracks, and she let you take the fall for the entire federal wire fraud charge. I read the text once, verifying the numbers and the catastrophic implication. I hit send. The message showed as delivered. I set the phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee mug, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast tasted bitter and perfectly hot. Somewhere across town, in the sprawling brick colonial, my father's phone vibrated with the incoming text. He would read it. He would check his own ledgers. He would realize his wife used his felony to quietly settle her own secret debts. The external threat I represented was no longer their primary concern. The true destruction was about to happen from the inside out. The unified front was dead, and Richard and Susan were about to viciously turn on each other, tearing the last remnants of their marriage apart in the ruins of their stolen empire. The immediate, explosive aftermath of the canceled wedding eventually faded, replaced by the slow, grinding machinery of corporate and legal bureaucracy. A month passed, 30 days characterized by a profound, unbroken silence from my family. The aggressive voicemails stopped. The desperate settlement offers ceased. The sudden quiet was not a sign of reconciliation. It was the sound of my parents realizing they were outmatched, outgunned, and facing a financial adversary far larger than a defiant daughter. My life settled into a new, disciplined rhythm. I attended my physical therapy lectures, completed my clinical rotations, and spent my evenings studying in the quiet sanctuary of the university library. The crushing anxiety regarding my tuition was gone, replaced by the secure knowledge that the bank's internal insurance protocol had fully covered my stolen funds. The $120,000 sat safely in an account locked under my name, generating interest, completely inaccessible to the man who tried to leverage it for his own vanity. While my academic path cleared, the storm raging across town intensified. The bank, having absorbed a 6-figure loss due to their own negligent oversight of a matured UTMA account, did not intend to write off the expense. Corporate financial institutions do not possess a capacity for forgiveness. They operate on the principle of absolute recovery. Diane, the paralegal at the student clinic who had guided my initial strike, kept me updated on the legal progression through public court filings. She treated my case as a masterclass in exploiting institutional liability, and she relished watching the bank's corporate attorneys dismantle my father. They are treating him like a hostile asset, Diane explained over coffee one afternoon in the student union. The bank's legal division filed a civil recovery suit against Richard, running parallel to the federal wire fraud investigation initiated by the Suspicious Activity Report. They are not just going after the principal. They are seeking punitive damages, legal fees, and the cost of the internal audit. What about his lawyer, I asked, remembering the smooth, confident voice of David Thorne attempting to negotiate a buyout. Thorne is a local defense attorney, Diane said, stirring her coffee with a plastic swizzle stick. He is used to negotiating plea deals for DUIs and minor embezzlement, not fighting a multinational bank's federal litigation team. Your father is bleeding cash just trying to keep Thorne on retainer. The legal fees alone are likely devastating. The reality of my father's situation was stark. He built his entire identity on the illusion of wealth and financial control. He believed his credit score elevated him above the consequences of his actions. Now he was trapped in a relentless, bureaucratic siege designed to strip him of every asset he possessed. The climax of the legal battle arrived during the third week of November. A thick, official-looking envelope arrived at my apartment. It was a summons for a mandatory civil mediation session, a prerequisite step required by the state court before moving the bank's recovery suit to a formal trial. My presence was requested as the primary beneficiary and initiating complainant. I arrived at the downtown Wilmington courthouse on a Tuesday morning. The mediation rooms were located on the 4th floor, a sterile environment of gray carpet, beige walls, and heavy soundproof doors. I did not bring legal counsel. I did not need to. The bank's attorneys were present, a phalanx of sharp-suited individuals armed with thick binders detailing every facet of Richard's financial history. They were not there to defend me. They were there to enforce their recovery. I was simply a required participant in the closing act. I entered the assigned conference room and took a seat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table. The bank's lead attorney sat next to me, offering a curt, professional nod. A few minutes later, the heavy door opened again. My father walked in, followed closely by David Thorne. I had not seen Richard since the night of the rehearsal dinner, when he stood raging in the center of the shattered glass centerpiece. The transformation was startling. The confident, imposing patriarch was gone. The man who sat down across the table from me looked exhausted, defeated, and significantly older. The expensive custom tuxedo had been replaced by an ill-fitting gray suit. His face was drawn, the lines around his mouth deeper, the skin pale and sallow. The arrogant fire in his eyes had burned out, leaving behind a dull, hollow resignation. Susan was not with him. Jason was nowhere to be seen. The unified family front had evaporated, destroyed by the revelation of Susan's secret credit card debt. Richard was facing the consequences entirely alone. The mediator, a retired judge with a no-nonsense demeanor, initiated the session. He outlined the purpose of the meeting, summarizing the bank's civil claim for full restitution, legal fees, and punitive damages related to the unauthorized wire transfer. The bank's lead attorney did not waste time with opening statements. He opened a binder and slid a document across the table toward Richard and his counsel. Mr. West, the attorney stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising baritone, my client is prepared to proceed to trial. However, considering the parallel federal wire fraud investigation currently reviewing your case, a public trial will undoubtedly accelerate a criminal indictment. The paper trail regarding the unauthorized access of a matured trust account is irrefutable. We offer a final settlement agreement today to resolve the civil liability. David Thorne picked up the document, his eyes scanning the terms. He leaned over, whispering urgently into Richard's ear. Richard stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hands resting flat on the table. The settlement requires full, immediate restitution of the $120,000 principal, plus an additional $40,000 covering legal and administrative recovery fees, the bank attorney continued, laying out the terms of surrender. If this sum is secured within 10 business days, the bank will formally withdraw its civil claim and decline to pursue further action regarding the suspicious activity report, allowing the federal inquiry to potentially resolve without corporate pressure. Thorne looked at the bank's attorney. My client's liquid assets remain frozen under the initial security hold. Securing $160,000 within 10 days requires liquidating protected retirement accounts. That is your client's burden, counselor, the bank attorney replied, entirely devoid of sympathy. The alternative is a public civil trial and a guaranteed federal wire fraud conviction, carrying a potential sentence of up to 20 years. We recommend liquidation. The ultimatum hung in the sterile air of the conference room. To avoid federal prison, Richard had to agree to the bank's terms. He had to drain the financial reserves he spent his entire life building. The poetic justice of the situation was absolute and merciless. Richard had sat in our living room and demanded I sacrifice my academic future, telling me to take out student loans so my brother could enjoy a luxury weekend. He told me that family meant sacrifice, and he demanded I bear the entire cost. Now, at 55 years old, staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, he was being forced to sacrifice his entire retirement. The 401k he bragged about, the pension he relied upon, the financial security he prized above his own children, was about to be entirely eradicated to pay back the bank he tried to defraud. Richard looked across the table, his gaze bypassing the bank's attorneys and locking onto me. The hollow resignation in his eyes shifted, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. He was trying to summon the ghost of our past dynamic, hoping to find the compliant daughter who would intervene and save him from the consequences of his actions. "Clara," he said, his voice cracking, shedding the polished veneer he usually maintained in legal settings. "Clara, please. I am your father. I made a mistake, but I was trying to do what was best for the family. You have to understand that. If I sign this, I lose everything I worked for. My retirement is gone. Susan and I are barely speaking. The house is going to be listed next week." He leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he reached across the polished mahogany. "Please, just tell them you authorized it. We can work out a payment plan between us. Do not let them do this to me. I am your father." The plea hung in the air, heavy with desperation and a pathetic lack of accountability. He was not apologizing for stealing my future. He was begging me to save his. He was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to leverage the biological connection he had repeatedly weaponized against me. I looked at the man sitting across from me. I felt no anger. I felt no vindictive joy. I felt a profound, clarifying detachment. The emotional ties that bound me to his approval had been severed completely the moment he prioritized a country club deposit over my medical degree. I reached into the folder resting on my lap. I pulled out a single, crisp piece of paper. It was the latest account statement from the secure portfolio holding my restored funds. The balance, prominently displayed in bold black ink, read $120,000. Plus the accrued interest for the month. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a tearful rebuttal. I placed the statement on the table and slid it slowly across the polished mahogany until it rested directly in front of his trembling hands. "You were my fiduciary," I said, my voice steady, reflecting the cold, bureaucratic reality of the room, "and you failed." Richard stared down at the bank statement. The numbers confirmed his total defeat. The money he stole was secure. My future was protected. His leverage was gone. He closed his eyes, a long, ragged exhale escaping his chest. The fight completely drained out of him. He picked up the heavy black pen provided by the mediator, pulled the bank settlement agreement toward him, and signed his name, officially authorizing the liquidation of his entire retirement to cover the cost of his own arrogance. The legal boundary was drawn, absolute and unbreakable. The financial execution was complete. The bank's attorneys gathered their documents, the mediator signaled the end of the session, and I stood up, walked out of the conference room, and left Richard West sitting in the ruins of the empire he destroyed. The May sunlight filtered through the blinds of my apartment, catching the dark fabric of the graduation gown draped over my desk chair. I traced the velvet trim with my fingertips. Today was the culmination of 3 years of relentless studying, double shifts, and a financial war I never asked to fight. I was walking across the stage to receive my degree in physical therapy. I was graduating without a single cent of student loan debt. The $120,000 shield my grandfather forged had held firm, protecting my trajectory when the people supposed to guard it tried to tear it down. My parents were not attending the ceremony. I had not spoken to Richard or Susan in 8 months, not since the heavy mahogany door of the mediation room clicked shut. Bureaucratic justice works with a slow, grinding certainty. Richard avoided a federal prison cell by honoring the terms of the settlement, draining his retirement portfolio to satisfy the bank's recovery division. Without his pension and investment accounts, the financial scaffolding of their lifestyle collapsed. The sprawling brick colonial in the cul-de-sac, the house that served as the stage for their curated superiority, was listed and sold within 60 days. They downsized to a cramped rented townhouse 2 towns over, stripped of the address and the equity they used to command respect. The social fallout was far worse than the financial ruin. In the affluent suburbs of Delaware, reputation is a fragile currency. The country club revoked their membership. The neighbors who used to attend their lavish holiday parties suddenly found reasons to look away at the grocery store. The final blow came from our extended family. Uncle David and Aunt Carol, the relatives who initially urged me to drop the fraud report and keep the peace, accessed the public court records. They read the bank's civil filings. They saw the forensic accounting tracing my grandfather's trust directly to a catering deposit and the subsequent diversion of funds to Susan's secret retail credit cards. The truth is a relentless solvent. It dissolved the narrative of the generous patriarch and the devoted mother. My parents became social pariahs, trapped in a bitter, fractured marriage, blaming each other in a house that was no longer theirs. I picked up my car keys and headed out the door, the graduation gown folded neatly over my arm. The commencement ceremony started in 2 hours, but I needed coffee. I drove to a busy independent cafe located near the edge of the university campus. It was the same chain of cafes where I used to work grueling weekend shifts, the same job my brother Jason used to mock at family dinners, calling it a dead-end hustle for people lacking ambition. The bell above the glass door chimed as I walked inside. The air was thick with the scent of roasted espresso beans and steamed milk. A long line of students and professors stretched toward the service counter. I took my place at the back, mentally reviewing the schedule for the afternoon. The line moved steadily. I stepped up to the primary register, looking down at my wallet to retrieve my debit card. "What can I get started for you?" The voice was dull, carrying the specific, hollow fatigue of a minimum-wage service worker dealing with a morning rush. But the cadence was unmistakable. I looked up. Standing behind the counter, wearing a faded green apron covered in milk stains and coffee grounds, was Jason. He held a black marker in one hand and a stack of paper cups in the other. His posture, once defined by a smug, untouchable entitlement, was hunched. The expensive haircuts and tailored blazers were gone, replaced by a required uniform polo shirt and a visor. Jason froze. His eyes locked onto mine. The marker slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the stainless steel counter. For 28 years, Jason navigated the world believing he was exempt from the grind of actual labor. He spent his days planning luxury bachelor parties and relying on his father's checkbook to mask his chronic failures. When Brittany threw the ring at his chest and the bank seized Richard's assets, the checkbook vanished. The safety net dissolved. Jason was forced to step into the reality he had spent his entire life avoiding. He was working the exact minimum wage barista job he told our relatives was beneath him. A profound, suffocating humiliation washed over his face. His cheeks flushed a dark, mottled red. He looked down, unable to sustain eye contact, his gaze dropping to the floor mat behind the register. He did not say a word. He did not try to explain. He just stood there, stripped of every illusion that once made him feel superior. I did not smile. I did not offer a sarcastic greeting or a triumphant speech. Gloating requires an emotional investment I no longer possessed for him. "A medium black drip coffee, please," I said, my tone polite and entirely detached. Jason punched the order into the point-of-sale system, his hands trembling slightly. He grabbed a cup, filled it from the large metal urn behind him, and placed it on the counter. He kept his eyes averted the entire time, staring fixedly at the digital total on the screen. $3.50, he mumbled. I handed him a crisp $10 bill. He opened the cash drawer, counting out the change with stiff, clumsy movements. He placed $6.50 on the counter, still refusing to look up. I picked up the single dollar bill and the coins, dropping them into my purse. I left the $5 bill sitting on the stainless steel counter next to the tip jar. "Keep the change," I said softly. I picked up my coffee, turned my back on the counter, and walked out the glass doors into the bright May morning. I did not look back. I walked across the graduation stage 2 hours later. When the dean handed me my diploma, I looked out at the sea of cheering families in the auditorium. I did not have a cheering section. There was an empty space where my parents should have been sitting. People ask me sometimes if I miss them. They ask if the isolation hurts, if I regret pulling the pin that leveled my family structure. The honest answer is complex. There is a specific, lingering grief in acknowledging that the parents you wanted never actually existed. It hurts to mourn the idea of a family, but that grief is finite. The piece that replaces it is permanent. I used to twist myself into knots, trying to earn a seat at a table where the admission price was my own future. I thought being a good daughter meant staying quiet while my resources were harvested to prop up my brother's ego. I thought loyalty meant accepting the theft. I learned that a boundary is not an act of cruelty. A boundary is a mechanism of survival. My father tried to use my deeply ingrained desire for his approval to bind me to a fraudulent contract. He expected my fear of abandonment to override my instinct for self-preservation. He miscalculated. I lost my parents, but I gained my life. I own my degree. I own my career. The ground beneath my feet belongs to me, built on the shield my grandfather provided and the hard line I drew in a country club dining room. I am 21 years old, and I am standing on solid rock. I am not sharing this story to elicit sympathy. I am sharing it because someone listening right now is sitting in a living room being told that their boundaries are ruining the family. Someone is looking at a drained bank account, a stolen credit score, or a broken promise, while a parent or a sibling insists that love requires endless sacrifice. If someone tells you family requires setting yourself on fire to keep them warm, hand them a match and walk away. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments. There is an invisible ledger kept in every home. It does not track mortgages, utility bills, or college funds. It tracks emotional currency. It records who is heard, who is dismissed, whose mistakes are paved over, and whose achievements are met with quiet indifference. When we listen to a story like Clara's, a narrative of a daughter forced to legally dismantle her own parents to protect her future, the initial shock is always the financial betrayal. The theft of a 6-figure trust fund is a loud, undeniable trespass. But the true tragedy, the one that lingers long after the court documents are filed and the bank accounts are frozen, is the relational bankruptcy that preceded the theft. Clara's story holds a mirror up to a specific, insidious failure in modern parenting, challenging our deepest assumptions about family responsibility, fairness, and the long-term guidance we owe our children. In traditional American culture, the family unit is often idealized as a sanctuary, a foundational bedrock where children learn the mechanics of fairness, honesty, and merit. We are taught that the home is the first democracy a child experiences. But what happens when the architects of that democracy tilt the scales? Richard and Susan did not wake up one morning and suddenly decide to become thieves. The groundwork for that betrayal was laid decades earlier, built upon a critical lack of emotional awareness and a distorted value system. They fell into the most destructive trap a parent can navigate: the creation of the golden child and the scapegoat. Parenting requires the profound emotional intelligence to recognize each child as a distinct, sovereign individual, not as an extension of the parents' egos or a tool to manage their own anxieties. In Jason, they saw a reflection of the status they desperately craved. They confused providing for a child with enabling him. By constantly shielding Jason from the consequences of his own failures, they robbed him of the very resilience he needed to survive adulthood. They handed him unearned rewards, teaching him that his comfort was a mandate the world was required to accommodate. In Clara, they saw something entirely different. They looked at her discipline, her late-night study sessions, and her quiet independence, and they did not see a daughter to be nurtured. They saw a resource to be harvested. This is the danger of weaponized resilience. Often, parents look at the child who requires the least amount of management, the one who quietly handles their own homework, pays for their own gas, and navigates their own hardships. And they mistake that self-sufficiency for a lack of need. They assume the strong child can bear the weight of the family's dysfunction. Richard sat in his curated living room and told his daughter, "Family means sacrifice." It is a phrase echoed in thousands of homes, usually with noble intentions. Sacrifice is the bedrock of parental love. It is the late nights, the skipped vacations, the quiet compromises made to ensure a child's foundation is secure. But in the hands of a narcissist, the concept of family sacrifice becomes a profound manipulation. Richard and Susan corrupted the term, twisting it from a voluntary offering of love into a mandatory tax levied against their youngest child. They demanded she set her own future ablaze merely to keep her brother's vanity warm. True family responsibility is not about maintaining the illusion of perfection for the neighbors. It is not about country club memberships, towering glass centerpieces, or protecting a fragile credit score. It is about honesty. It is about the quiet, unglamorous work of teaching children that their actions carry weight, that fairness is non-negotiable, and that love is never conditional upon compliance. When parents lack the emotional awareness to foster genuine, honest connections, the family structure becomes purely transactional. The home transforms into a marketplace where affection is bought with obedience and value is determined by utility. Clara realized that she was not a daughter in her father's eyes. She was a line of credit. The moment she stopped funding the illusion, her value dropped to zero. The long-term consequences of this parenting failure are devastating, written plainly in the aftermath of the canceled wedding. By attempting to curate a flawless public image, Richard and Susan destroyed their actual family. They sent a 28-year-old man into the world wearing a barista apron, utterly unequipped to handle the sting of reality, stripped of the unearned arrogance they had painstakingly built for him. They forced a brilliant, hard-working 21-year-old woman to learn that her safest boundary was total isolation. Good parenting is about preparing your children for the world, not shielding one from it at the lethal expense of the other. It is about instilling the kind of integrity that survives when the audience leaves and the applause stops. We gather around these narratives because they speak to a quiet truth many of us carry. They validate the heavy, often lonely choices we have to make when the people who are supposed to protect our boundaries are the ones actively trying to tear them down. If you find yourself nodding along to Clara's journey, if you have ever been the one expected to shrink so someone else could shine, or if you have had to build your own shield because the ones you were promised never arrived, you are not alone. This is exactly why we explore these complex, deeply human dynamics here. If you value stories that uncover the hidden truths of family, resilience, and the courage it takes to draw a line in the sand, I invite you to join our community. Please take a moment to follow the channel Eva Tells Stories. Together, we navigate the difficult, beautiful, and profound moments that define who we ultimately choose to become. As we step back and look at the wreckage and the triumph of Clara's story, a lingering thought remains. The dust settles, the bank accounts are secured, and the legal battles fade into the silent archives of a courthouse. Clara walks across a graduation stage toward a future she fought tooth and nail to secure, while her parents sit in the quiet ruins of a downsized life, surrounded by the ghosts of a status they could not maintain. It makes you wonder about the invisible ledger in your own life. When the table is finally cleared and the grand performances are over, what is the legacy we actually leave behind? Are we building foundations that will support our children when the storms come? Or are we constructing fragile glass centerpieces, just waiting for the table to shake? We all cast a shadow on the people we raise. The question we have to live with is whether that shadow provides shelter or simply leaves them in the dark.